Well, good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Select Committee of Tynwald on the role of the Legislature in the budget process. I'm Juan Watson, I'm a member of this committee, and as our chair is on the other side of the table, I'll be acting chair for this hearing. With me are Mr Ashford and Mr Thomas. The chair will not be participating on this side of the table as he's the current Treasury Minister. This committee was established in December 2024 to examine the role that Tynwald should play in the budget process, and today we're meeting with representatives of Treasury. Just a final plea to turn mobiles onto silent so that we don't have any interruptions, and I'll be making sure that only one person is speaking at a time. So for the benefit of Hansard, could you please introduce yourselves, including your titles and how long you've been in post, and we'll start with you, Minister, please.
Yes, Dr Alex Allenson, Minister for the Treasury, and I've been in post for 4 years.
Thank you.
Sarah Oxall, Deputy Chief Financial Officer, and I've been in post for 24 months.
Cadric Randall, Chief Financial Officer, and I was appointed in January 2019.
Cool. Thank you very much. These questions are largely sort of focused at the officers in terms of the operators of the system rather than the designers of the system as politicians. Can I start by asking whether either of you have any experience in budget setting for large organisations outside of... Oh, sorry, I'll let you do your statement first. My sincere apologies. I'll let you have your 2 minutes.
I've got, just an opening statement, just to set the scene, I thought, really.
Apologies.
Just say, as coming to be aware, jurisdictions around the world adopt varying approaches to public budgeting, and the models can be either led by the executive, the legislature, or a combination of both, with varying degrees of influence or control, each with its own merits and limitations. So there's no universally accepted best practice, rather each system reflects the constitutional and political context in which it operates. So the Isle of Man, as far as I can see, employs a hybrid model, and so while the budget is predominantly shaped by the government of the day, it is subject to parliamentary scrutiny before enactment. Whatever views there are on the effectiveness of this framework, it has provided a stable and effective basis for financial governance, and notably, and I thank Minister Ashford for this information, no budget placed before Tynwald for approval in the last 60 years has failed to carry, although of course members have and do vote against, thereby registering objections and raising particular concerns. And of course, a great many of the policies that underpin the budget will have been subject to Tynwald scrutiny already. I think one of the key distinctions between executive-led and legislature-led approaches lies in their foundations. Executive-led models are driven by the strategic and policy priorities of the government or the Council of Ministers, whereas the legislature, I can never say that probably, led models seek consensus across a broader spectrum of members and political perspectives. So each approach presents its own challenges in terms of coherence, timeliness and resource demands. So over the years, Treasury has introduced various initiatives to engage members at different stages of the financial management cycle. However, in reality, these efforts have met with limited success and has not resulted in sustained levels of increased interaction. Should Tynwald wish to see a greater or different form of involvement from wider membership in determining the budget, Treasury will of course respond accordingly, but it's important to recognise, however, that such a shift would likely make the budget more difficult to agree, extend the timeline for its development and require additional resources within the Treasury. Government is fortunate to be supported by experienced and highly knowledgeable officers who contribute to the development of the budget each year. Nonetheless, as with other service areas on the island, staffing levels are modest and resource constraints remain an ongoing reality across all of government. So just lastly, Treasury obviously remains committed to continuous improvement, from refining the presentation of the Pink Book to enhancing internal processes, and we do welcome constructive suggestions from members and stakeholders alike.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I think there are several themes that you've picked up in there that we will dig into a little deeper as we move on through the session. So let me get back to my opener, just as to whether either of you have any experience in budget setting for large organisations outside of the Isle of Man government.
No, my experience, other than reviewing them from an audit perspective in the UK public sector, is predominantly within the Isle of Man government.
Super.
Yes, I've had experience in other companies outside of Isle of Man government in the financial planning process, although I would highlight that doing budgets and financial planning for industry is very different to public sector.
I was just wondering if there was any sort of best practice that you thought would be you'd seen on the outside that perhaps wasn't existing on the inside.
I think it's the other dynamics to the budget that are different. They're just very different.
I think,
So I think it's very
my experience as
difficult.
well from working with lots and lots of public sector organisations in the UK, there are aspects that have been incorporated in there, but I don't think there is one model that to say that's the panacea, that's the one that's going to run everything. But certainly, you know, when we speak to other organisations, and you've had conversations with Guernsey, for example, about the way they do things, and if we identify something that's good practice, we would do that. So there's changes to the Pink Book last year as well, which we picked up from reviewing what other people have done as well. So we're always open to looking at those ideas, but it is, I guess, the crown dependencies, aren't they? The small jurisdictions are unique almost in the breadth of what they have. So you think of what we do in comparison to the UK, the amount of people we've got to do it. It's quite a challenge.
So, in terms of the main challenges for the officers, what would you say that the most significant challenges are when it comes to preparing a budget for as Treasury officers?
Let me start. I think and it's not just for officers, this is for politicians and for everybody really. I think one of the main challenges is getting a cross-government view on priority. That's a struggle. How do you assess the importance of a police officer against a nurse or an accountant? It's inherent in all the services in an organisation like this. Has such a broad range of services. How do you decide which one? I think those decisions often come down to political judgment, political understanding. So that is a real challenge, really. And I guess I think I'll just put in a strength, if I may. One of the strengths we do have in the budgeting process is the medium-term financial strategy and the way that we model short-term implications to see what their medium-term effects are. So that's something that's very strong within there. So we've got we're strong from the top down, but I think we probably need to improve some of the granularity of the information that we get. We probably over years some of that's sort of been lost a little bit. So hence is why we've engaged a firm to help us with a priority-based budgeting initiative, which is underway, which I can share the terms of reference with the committee if you're interested, which seeks to look at all of the services that are provided across government, understand the service levels that they're operating at, and the costs associated with them, and in particular the implications of changing the service levels. And then from there, we can then instigate an approach to try and look at priorities as well, to put some priority behind some of the decisions. And I guess that's more necessary because over the last 10 years since I've been doing the budget, really, the financial position has become more stressed, and there's less and less resources. And I think trying to fit a quart into a pint pot is becoming more of an issue. And we need that level of granularity under there to understand what the different service levels look like.
So, looking at it then from not just Treasury's perspective, but you obviously deal with all the departments and you're the common link with those departments. What do you think what aspects of the current process do you think cause the most difficulty for the departments that you work with, the sort of stresses and strains that they have in putting together their budget and estimates to send back to you?
I think again across Treasury and the wider departments, there is no dedicated resource that is looking at the budget process. So they have to fit everything alongside their business as usual work, as we do in Treasury. So that can be a challenge. So bringing in all of the bids that they're looking for and their priorities in a time that we can then assess it and then come to members with a presentation. That has to be done in a fairly tight time frame, and they're working on lots of other things as well at the same time. So that can be a challenge. I think it's also a challenge for them in terms of they've got lots of priorities, and we will ask them to prioritise their requirements in the budget, and that can be a challenge as well, because they have lots of priorities and they're all a priority. So that can be a challenge.
So yeah, in terms of that staffing aspect, I mean, I'm sort of so long in the tooth now that I can remember a time when the Department of Health and Social Security had a financial director and 2 management accountants working for them, back in the late 90s. what sort of staffing levels are there available now? Because it's now gone into financial shared services, and there's now Treasury partners for departments, as opposed to each department having its own financial director. Can you tell us about how that works and how many you've got in that pool compared to the demands on their time from the departments?
So I think that the collective amount of time available is probably not much different than it was previously, because each of the departments has a dedicated finance business partner and a number of staff below there. But what we have done through the financial advisory service, where the whole idea of it was to give more resilience and consistency in the approaches between the departments. So when things were done in individual departments, when you're a minister in a DHA, for example, a finance director in DHA just thinks completely differently than the person in DOI or in desk. So if you got an issue where somebody was unavailable for a period, or there was some turnover of staff, it became very difficult to pull those resources to go in and help out. So that's what the financial advisory service is doing, as well as to try and create a finance profession for finance officers within government, and give them sort of some opportunity for rotation. But the departments do have a dedicated finance business partner and support behind them, so they're still there. But even so, there's still an awful lot to do. So I don't think this problem is made any more difficult or any less difficult. Maybe it's helped a bit because you can talk to colleagues a bit more who would have experience of working in the departments than it has been previously. It's just difficult to be able to find the time to bring everything together.
So how many are there in that financial advisory service?
I can send you the structure diagram. That's probably the best way. Top of my head, I can't remember. Do you remember any of that?
No, because we've had some leave recently and start, so we would have to get the most current number.
And all of those are sort of accountants of one sort or another. They're either management accountants, certified accountants, or...
Not all of them are qualified, but they all have financial experience. And again, of course, then so financial advisory services is one element of it. Obviously, the centralisation of financial shared services, which was about 2010, was it, if I remember rightly, that there's offices in there as well. So, but I think it's good to say that the departments do have access to that advice.
Could I just interject, Chair? How does the financial situation with Manx Care compare with departments? Because that was one of the questions that actually came up in Tynwald this week.
So Manx Care have the majority of staff that work providing financial advice to Manx Care are Treasury officers, apart from the Director of Finance post that was in Financial Services previously, but is now a Manx Care or PSC CS appointment. I think at the moment they have appointed an interim responsible financial officer. So that's a difference there. But the officers and the finance business partners are part of FAS, but the seat on the board is not FAS.
Okay. So again, I think just in terms of the numbers, where they are, and the qualifications would be a useful thing for us to have back. And is it that same FAS team that is responsible for putting the budget together, or is that? I appreciate they'll be working with the submissions to departments. Who's actually, how many staff and what roles are they within government that are actually putting together the budget?
We have 3 officers that are involved in the budget process, in the coordination of the budget, but they don't just do the budget, they also do the audited accounts and other tasks as well, the financial tasks. So they provide a lot of resource on a number of different aspects of financial governance and management.
Accounts are produced by FAS. The finance business partners produce the management accounts because they're the department's management accounts. Yeah,
but they also review internal fund claims. They look at they provide support around the capital monitoring side as well. So there's a lot of activities that are done by a very small team. There's also across Treasury, we also call in members of staff from the divisions within Treasury where there are specific policy discussions. So we'll bring tax officers in, but again, there's no dedicated officers within income tax or customs or social security that purely look at the budget. They'll be doing work for us and bringing that in alongside their business as usual work.
You have to manage your own finance function as well as a department,
Yes.
as well as coordinate
Correct,
the overall. I get it. And have you ever actually sort of benchmarked yourself compared to other similar jurisdictions? You said about sort of comparing notes with Jersey and Guernsey. There would probably be our most similar comparators in terms of what they have at the centre in terms of both financial advice to departments and the production of accounts and the budgeting process. Have you actually done that, and where do we fit in that?
We have had we have set up working groups where we've discussed our own different processes with Jersey and Guernsey in the past. I'm not sure how that's changed now, but previously they had Jersey had a lot more officers involved in the budget process than we do, and their processes were very different. They had gone through the business, the financial advisory side, so they introduced business partnering as well, and they were finding some challenges and making amendments at the time to try and help fit with their processes. But they have a lot more staff and they have a lot more budget to deliver the budget. Their processes that we've taken on, some of the changes we've made to the capital process have been done based on some of the conversations we've had with Jersey around how they do their capital processes. So we have tried to bring in learning from other jurisdictions where they've advised that actually it's been beneficial in the way that they've done it, and it addressed some of the challenges that we had at the time.
Well, perhaps you could just unpick that a little bit further for us in terms of what the challenge was that was identified, what the Jersey solution was that's been implemented, and why.
So it was around the capital financing, the changes to the capital financing reserve and the project development fund coming in, and the presentation of we changed the presentation of the capital budget in terms of the projects going under the island plan priority. So we made some changes there as a result of some of the feedback that we'd had from Jersey and how they did it. We changed the way that the future years and how we presented some of the phasing across those future years for the capitals project side of it. We brought in the approval per project rather than the loan funding aspect of it. So you would have the estimate of the project, and then you would have an annual vote on the spend for each year. We've changed that to the project budget being approved in its entirety for clarity. So we've made some changes in that space as well. Again, this was a number of years ago when we did some of these changes, and some of the changes to the presentation have moved back when we found and had feedback that actually some of those presentational changes were slightly confusing for people.
I guess some of the issues we were trying to address was some of the comments that we've made. I think the PAC may have made comments about project planning, about sort of the failure of capital projects, or failure, or some of the reasons that they don't always go is because of a need to put more effort into the planning. That was what the project development funding was there for, to allow people to work business cases up. And the other one was about speed, wasn't it? About speed to get approvals, and there being an annual approval, we thought it was much better to go to a quarterly one, and that would enable you to take things as and when they're ready. So those were the problems we were trying to solve, wasn't it, really?
In terms of all the legislature, I mean, there's been an increasing trend over also in the last 19 years about going from individual votes for an individual project through to sticking it all in column 2 and incorporating it in the budget process and sort of aggregating the decision making. Is that a fair reflection of where it's at in terms of the role of the legislature in all that, rather than just the presentation within the budget cycle?
There's a balance, isn't there, always, between what you put in for approval in terms of the detail and keeping things moving. A lot of the stuff that's in column 2 is allocations for ongoing maintenance and projects. I don't think there's been any more of a shift towards column 2. Some of the maintenance activity will have increased over the last few years because we haven't had an awful lot of capital expenditure. So I'm not answering your question.
Well, I'm trying to think. I think the last financial motion for a capital one was this Liverpool landing stage. I can't think of when the another one previous to that would be, because whereas I think when I joined there were far more regular motions for capital spend on projects.
So the changes that we made in respect to the Project Development Fund have probably contributed to that. There are a lot more projects having funding approved to do the design and feasibility side of things.
I think it's fair to say, though, have the changes we put in solved all of the problems that we thought they were in? Then no, we need to review it again because the amount of capital projects coming through is much lower than we would anticipate. So
Just tend to be the way that they just create some interesting new ones. Mr. Thomas.
I mean, it might be helpful to have that statement about the capital projects sent to us, because I wasn't there in January this year, but I seem to remember you had 3 projects approved in January, the airport, runways, and so on. So it might be quite helpful to, to put the meat behind what Mr. Speaker just asserted about, when we've had the capital projects and whether that indicates they're the most important if they've come forward in that way. My actual question that I wanted to ask was, I found I've got 2 sentences and then I have 2 questions. The 2 sentences, I found your opening 2-minute statement fascinating, and your conclusion that we had a hybrid model. I also found it fascinating that Manx Care is slightly different because of the Manx Care Act, which is what the Treasury Minister said. So my 2 questions are, the legislation that you operate under as 1950s and 1980s, first half of 1980s, whereas the government operates under legislation from the second half of the 1980s. Do we need to look at the legislation to decide whether we were happy with a hybrid model or whether we're more an executive model or a legislative model? Because it could be
decision, the will of Tynwald, isn't it?
Exactly that. My point is, perhaps that's what the public needs to think. Perhaps has a misunderstanding. Perhaps there are people who remember that Tynwald set the budget, and now the reality is there's differences between what it says in the Council of Ministers Act and the Treasury Act and the Finance Acts. That's my question.
So there's very little in legislation relating to the budget. Very little. It's all on precedent and things that have happened and respecting the will of Tynwald. I think all we're required to do in the Treasury Act is to lay the accounts that show a surplus on the revenue account. That's all there is. So there isn't really any legislation. However, Tynwald decides that he wants to do it as a matter for Tynwald. And I've said in the opening statement, if Tynwald decides he wants to do something different, we will do it. That's what's happened. But as far as legislation is required, there isn't anything.
I think you could run just about any system in the world under the legislation that we have.
You could.
Okay, just moving on then to a bit more of the process around the budget. As we know, and has been much criticised by me at least, about the secrecy of the budget, the fact that it's only made public on budget day. What's the reason for that secrecy?
Precedent. It's always been kept precedent. A big secret. I think that's a key element of it.
What's the better answer? Because we've always done it.
Well, I've got that's one, but that's true. That's one of them because it's a kind of a political view on how the government wants to run the budget. I guess if you keep everything back and announce it all in one go, it gives a locus for the announcements. And then the other one is really around revenue protection. And taxation, people announcing things early in taxation, and people changing their behaviours in terms of the way that they might react. Those are the 3 reasons.
So just to explain to me how that would happen, because obviously the budget's released in February, and people would still have a number of weeks before the end of the tax year to plan their affairs. So does it?
The risk is less than the closer it is to the budget.
Okay, and then of course the reason that it's done in the UK is more around sort of VAT and duty implications that take effect immediately, and that just doesn't apply here because we're in a common purse agreement.
Sure. So
really it's only the income tax things, and they would still have a good clear month to change their affairs.
I think so. I think that if there was a decision to open things up more early, we'd have to look at anti-forestalling provisions, etc. But those are the reasons.
Okay. In one of the reasons that the secrecy is criticised is that it means that there is a very short period for members to actually sort of seek any external advice, and the only real source of advice to members are members of the Treasury themselves. And so there's an allegation there about marking your own homework, which isn't isn't ideal. So what actions has Treasury undertaken, and what actions has Treasury considered that they might undertake to support the interpretation and comprehension and analysis of the budget?
We have tried. Do you want to run through some of the things that we've done over the past few years to engage more with members?
So we have produced additional member presentations to give an overview of the financial position for the current financial year, because that forms part of the estimates that come in for the following budget. So we've done presentations on that. We've done some workshops because we said previously one of the key challenges was that priority piece and having that one view of the priorities for government as a whole. We did a workshop with members to look at how members would prioritise certain areas of the budget. So we did that piece. We have produced.
Was that, sorry?
That was I can't. I'll find the date and send it on to you.
We tried it September 23.
Yeah, I thought it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So we did that. We have produced additional fiscal modelling and produced archetypes. We always offer for anybody who has any members who have any specific areas they want to discuss in the Pink Book, that they can come and speak to officers across all of the divisions, and we will help support that. So we've done a number of different things. We've also produced and changed our budget in brief document to try and simplify some of the key measures in the budget as well. So there's varying different things that we have done through the years.
Remember years ago, members were 2 weeks, didn't they? Before Tynwald did have the Pink Book, we've moved that out to 4 weeks. I think is where we've been. It's
just the time; it's because there is an absolute ban on members talking to anyone outside of the Treasury on that. And whilst I appreciate that there's rightly or wrongly are concerned about people planning their income tax affairs, the fact that there is nowhere independent of Treasury for them to go for that advice, I'm just wondering if that's a circle that's ever going to be able to be squared.
I understand. I mean, I said if it was decided that members should be able to seek external advice, I think there are some risks or issues around that one. One is, I think the external advisor would probably come and have to talk to us anyway, because there's a lot of the information that we base things on, which would be fine if members came and spoke to us with more information and more queries around things. So we would be happy with that. We'd want to make sure that anybody who was spoken to externally didn't gain an advantage over any of their competitors, and they weren't using that information. And I guess there's a political if they went to a tax advisor, for example, and it didn't go to another tax advisor, so one tax advisor had more information early than another, I think we just have to work out how we would control that. And then I guess some of this stuff is political as well, isn't it? Because it's about how do you present the budget? I mean, use the UK example where nothing was said at all, was it? And it still isn't to an extent. But you see, the trend is more and more is leaked or trailed, I guess, is not leaked, that's the right word, moving forward. So from a political point of view, you'd have to work out how you could control that. I think those are the main elements of it.
And what risks do you see around increasing the gap between the announcement of the budget and the vote on the budget?
Getting it done. That's the element of it. So
if you had that members might think for themselves if they were given enough time to do so.
That's you could say that. I think. I mean, it's not. We don't. Treasury officers don't have any issue with members having whatever information they need as early as they possibly can. We don't have an issue with that. I think the way that the budget works, to making sure that we're basing the budget on the up-to-date information as we can get. So things like, we use September CPI to set benefit levels and what other elements of September CPI in the UK as well. and they don't come out to November. So there's decisions that can't be made until that the fullness of all that has come together, and also the in-year performance of the departments. So actually, time you're getting into sort of late October, this time of year, you're starting to get all the information, and then you've got to put that all in together, identify what your parameters are, what the council minister's strategy is around income and expenditure, and then take that through. There is a lot of work involved in that, and whilst the budget bids have started back and have come in at the end of July, they've still got to go through, and then people have got to be able to agree those things, and they've got to be able to put into a form for the pink book to go out. So that is quite a task in itself. You could say, well, that's fine, just start earlier. I don't know how that would work in an election year. So where you've got elections in September and the government probably not formed and running until November, just going to struggle to do anything before Christmas, even if the dates were changed. So that's any thoughts?
I think that's
Okay, Mr. Thomas, and then Mr.
It's just again a bit beyond member understanding, but I just want to talk about how members should perceive Treasury. I describe how I've perceived Treasury, and it goes back to your description of as having a hybrid model. I've always assumed, outside government and inside government, that Treasury is neutral between the executive and the legislature. You would treat non-government backbenchers the same way as you would treat government. Your role is not to help government get its budget through, it's to have the budget that's approved in Tynwald or that's laid before Tynwald. Are you neutral, or are you government's Treasury?
I mean, clearly we are there to help the government of the day to implement its policies and strategies.
But just to throw you a bone on this one, I'm sure you'd also value you'd state the advice that you give members would be as impartial as it could be.
Oh, you're absolutely
and full as it could be.
But the council ministers, and for example, will have access to information that a member wouldn't. So we would not be able to give the same advice to a member of Tynwald, depending if they had the same information. Of course, we would. Absolutely. So yes, so we are impartial, but we still work for the Treasury Minister's part and Council Ministers.
So to speak over you, but I've had advice in the past, that they can help me work up amendments and so on. That is the meaning of the Treasury Act. So I've always assumed that in actual fact, Treasury would help somebody work up costings and how it could be funded and so on. So I've always assumed that Treasury actually helps backbenchers who are not in government at the time as much as members understand to be able to use that information.
Yeah. And if I could say, in terms of things like private members' bills in the past or other issues like that, Treasury will work on those completely independent of myself or the council ministers.
Yeah.
Mr. Ashford.
I'm Treasury has for many years as a backbencher, answered quite a lot of queries from me. Just following on from what Mr. Speaker was saying about the timings of the budget, and appreciating obviously the length of time it takes, which a lot of people sometimes outside of here don't understand it takes to pull the budget together. Where does Treasury see the danger though in keeping those timescales but being presented to the February Tynwald but not actually voted on until the March? Or indeed, because with my experience of some timetables, you could get it to members and then get it to the January Tynwald, but not holding the vote until the February, which then would put it public, which would allow members to go out and seek outside advice, because you would avoid that thing about one tax consultant knowing more than the other, because it would already be public knowledge.
I think it's the ability for the industry to be able to make changes to their systems. So a lot of changes depending on the tax policies that are changed in the budget. The industry will have to react and make changes to their own systems and payroll areas. So the process at the moment gives some time for them to do that. By moving that vote would provide less time for industry to be able to make those changes, and in enough time. I think that would probably be the
and bring it forward to January. I just think it's a matter of getting it done getting it agreed. It's not. It's you know, there's kind of stages in the budget, aren't there? As you know anyway. There's getting all the information together. There's internally from departments, etc., members. There's getting all the external information, so what's happening in the economy, the CPI. Then there's getting it agreed with the Council of Ministers, and then there's taking it forward to Tynwald. So all of those things need to follow a sequence. So if you're pushing back into January, that pushes you back because of Christmas, etc. Probably 4 to 5 weeks earlier than you would be otherwise.
That's why I specifically picked January, because in my experience, normally by that point in January, you're already briefing members. So you've already had a document that's gone through Council of Ministers. You've already got a completed budget.
Like I said, you could do it. I just think we need some more resource to be able to do it. That's the honest answer.
There's no real reason why the 31st of March needs to be the fiscal year end either. So in terms of, you know, if Christmas gets in the way of the current cycle, you could always change the current cycle. You know, Jersey, for example, has a 31st December year end.
You could, yeah, and I think, like you said, the linkage to the election cycle, all sorts of things would need to be thought about within that as well. But I said at the beginning, you can do pretty much whatever you want. It's just the practicalities of getting those things sometimes, and sometimes I've done quite a few budgets now. Some of them are much easier to agree than others. Some of them come together earlier than others. There's always a risk with pushing things that you don't get an agreement. And I guess I know you're saying about weeks a long time in politics. It can be when you're setting the budget as well. And we have started, certainly, I mean, COVID was an extreme example of that, where you start off into a period planning and everything changes. I mean, obviously some of the economic uncertainty we've had as well over the last few years has changed the way we do things. And the ability, I think that's one of the advantages of having a system like we have now is that we're able to react very, very quickly. If you had a system where there was more scrutiny around, it would take you longer to do those things. Not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that it's one of the advantages, I think.
Push back on that a little bit there. I mean, what we have seen over many years in the Isle of Man is relatively stable tax revenues. Yep. So in terms of, whilst I appreciate big shocks do come along, you know, the COVIDs of this world, the Ukraine wars and the energy peaks, actually, in terms of our incomes, they've been relatively stable for a long time, so that sort of mitigate against some of the things you're saying around being able to do more in advance in terms of setting the overall envelope of knowing really what your income is that you've got available to spend. Whilst I appreciate some of the spending decisions are going to be could be later, actually, I'm just wondering, do we do enough perhaps to sort of lock in some of the broader income parameters early on within that budget setting cycle?
We do. I think I don't disagree with what you said. The earlier you do it, the more risk you have that they're wrong, and the longer you leave it, the more likely you are to be accurate. And it's a balance within that.
Okay, Mr. Thomas.
This is moving on to a couple of very brief questions about public understanding and engagement with the budget. First one is when presentational changes are made in the budget, for example, in how figures are represented, what consideration is given to ensuring that members and stakeholders can still make comparisons across different years? I don't have a specific example, but we would make sure that there was a note in the Pink Book, and we would make sure the Minister explained it in the presentation to members. And if any member asked us, then we'd pick them up. I'm trying to think in terms of dramatic changes. I mean, I guess 2015 there was quite a big change in the presentation when I first came in as a financial controller. That moved from an old style Pink Book to a new style. We have developed things over the years, put some new tables in, perhaps thought about how we can present things in a different way. But I think someone who had read both the documents would be able to find out, they would be able to see quite clearly what the changes were. So because we would put in an explanation in there. If we haven't done that, then I apologise, but that's definitely our intention. And presumably you would make the data from decades past available in whatever way was necessary for government or for other policy makers if it was requested.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. I say that there was quite a change from around 2015 to some of the way that things are accounted for. Some of the pink book was netted. So, for example, you can in the old pink book you couldn't really see the national insurance. It was just in as a balancing figure in the national insurance account, where we pulled it forward onto the face of the accounts to show the grossed up expenditure. So people could that was the idea. That was to help people understand what the expenditure was, because it wasn't showing in full. So you might find some of those things. We'd have to go back and recalculate some of that stuff. But I say, if anybody wants information, Mr. Ashford's very good at researching these sort of things as well, so get those information. So.
Thank you. And the second one is, have you looked at measures to help the public understand the Pink Book, or innovate how the Pink Book is presented to certain audiences? For instance, people who have less knowledge than others, or people who have protected characteristics.
So I think there are some complicated aspects of a government's finances. As we said, we'll talk about national insurance. National insurance is quite a difficult one. If people want a detailed understanding, they can talk to the Director of National Insurance, who will talk to them for hours on end about it and explain all of its complexities. But they are quite understanding them is quite integral in understanding how the budget works sometimes. So trying to pull it back up into a very high level guide can be quite difficult at times. So taking a pink book and trying to consolidate it into a smaller pink book, well, I think would be very challenging in terms of giving too little information. What we do try to do though is through the comms side, really. So we started using things like social media to try and access people that might not be interested in it otherwise. The Courier app, for example, is developed over the year and sets out in high level terms sort of what's actually happening around the budget. Certainly things in the past have been tried. So road shows, for example, were done by the previous administration when they went to different areas and explain the budget and link those people. I think it's very difficult. I also think, whilst the decisions in the budget obviously impact on everybody on the Isle of Man, not everybody's that interested in the depths of the budget. So when you speak to people, the media will go out and interview people in the street. And what do you think of the budget? I don't think any of them probably sat down and looked at the pink book and thought, well, maybe some of them have, but not a lot of them. I think it's a problem, isn't it, with the finance industry more generally, is people don't look at the accounts. And I guess that's part of the minister's role, really, has been able to communicate that to people in a way that they can understand.
We have published the archetypes as well, so it provides more information on what it means to certain people in different types of finance groups. So we have produced that and we published it. We've also published bids. We publish our management accounts now, so we're trying to put more financial information out there to help assist with that wider understanding for people that are interested.
Yeah, and again, if people have ideas or things that they would like for particular stakeholder groups to explain those things more, we would react to that. We've tried a number of things, and generally the interaction isn't that great.
Yeah, do you do anything within council? Let me reel back. Not everyone comes into Tynwald with a finance background, shocking as that sounds. But what do you do within council ministers to do about public financial education? Is that any different from what you've made available in the past to members of Tynwald? And are you thinking of any plans as to what you might do for a new intake of members of the House of Keys this time next year, in terms of making sure that they understand the moving parts of government from a financial perspective?
Yeah, so we would certainly do a focused induction for a new administration, and when a new minister comes into the Council of Ministers as well, we obviously speak to them around that as well. And I guess in part of about wanting to disclose the inner workings of the Council of Ministers, we would make sure that whenever we're going in to present the budget, that there's an understanding of how it all works and fits together as part of that.
And how much time does that take to sort of take someone? You've had plenty of experience over many years and many ministers now coming into council. How much time do they get in order to sort of get themselves up to speed from a sort of financial education perspective?
I think it varies on their interests, I guess, and background. So I don't you can say it takes a certain amount of time. I think some people because of the way that they are, more interested in it, and will always struggle to get a full understanding. Some people have got more of an natural leaning towards it, will pick it up much quicker.
Perhaps I should sort of think the question differently about maybe in terms of the induction that's given to new Tynwald members. How long would that take? How long would you spend doing that? I'm just trying to work out if what the time and the curriculum that goes into it is sufficient for the task that we're trying to sort of upskill them to.
So we would always be happy to do more, I guess is my answer to that. I think do you remember? I can't remember what we did for Tynwald members. Sorry, we definitely did some induction for new members.
Yeah, it's just a matter of I think the last one I remember was Paula Primrose come down to the big thing in the Brule suite. But just in terms of trying to sort of set that into some sort of curriculum and then a feedback loop from members as to what would you like to have known more about, what and so making sure that happens. I think
that's some of the stuff that Sarah was describing earlier about we've done a number of presentations. So we've done some workshops with members as well. So we offer drop-in sessions for the people that want to come in and understand what's in the published accounts, etc. Again, as I said, they've been met with limited success. So we will keep those initiatives moving, but we do struggle to get much interest, I think.
Yep, so just want to move on to Treasury's role and also the transparency around funding decisions. The first thing I want to ask is, if you were talking to someone who had absolutely no knowledge about government, absolutely no knowledge about Tynwald, how would you describe Treasury's role and purpose?
So the Treasury has a statutory function, doesn't it, to oversee and control the finances of government. So that's its statutory duty under the Treasury Act. The Treasury works with the government of the day to help it deliver its strategies and objectives, and that's what we're doing. But we also have a responsibility to ensure that there's strong financial governance across the organisation. And that we provide financial advice and make sure there's adequate kind of financial considerations that are taken into all of those decision-making purposes. I think decisions that are made.
So would you view Treasury as more of a facilitator or an enforcer?
Both. I think when it comes to financial control, elements of financial governance, Treasury has the powers that are made by the Treasury for financial directions, for financial governance. So it will enforce them, and I think that's right that it should have those elements in there. When there are decisions being made by the Council of Ministers or by the Treasury, certainly the Treasury officer's role is to make sure that the people are appraised of the financial implications of those, and to help work with the government to look at the various different options. I think one of the key roles that we have is to ensure that long-term implications of decisions are understood. And cross-government, because I think it's been said, well, Treasury's in a privileged position that it has probably the only place where it has a full view across all of government. I think that's right. I think it's inherent in what we do. So it's our responsibility to make sure that all of those implications are poured across.
So that moves me very nicely on to this, because this is directly from feedback that have been given from members. And some members have expressed that they see Treasury as the only body with that bird's eye view of government and finances and priorities. And ministers of department tend to only generally have sight of their own area, apart from at budget time, when the budget is being presented as a whole. Do you think that's a good way of doing things? We produce consolidated management accounts that go to the Council of Ministers. So there is a monthly discussion on the financial position of government within the Council of Ministers. Obviously, we're now publishing on a quarterly basis management accounts as well, which would show that position. I think it's part of the role of Treasury is to hold that overview, and it's our responsibility to provide information across the organisation. Is it a good way to do it? I don't know what other way you would do it. Do you think there's more you could do maybe with members wider, for them to have that overview, to be able to understand what's going on across government?
Perhaps within the parameter setting side of early. I mean, you said you tried some of the sort of early engagement in September 23.
So we did workshops. Do you want to?
We did workshops on the current priorities. So there were challenges. There were all of the challenges that Treasury were having to try and balance, and we offered that to the floor of for the Tynwald members in the Burrell suite, so that there was opportunity for members to identify what their priorities are to help feed into the budget process. But again, that didn't really work as well as we'd hoped it would. So there was, I think, the challenge around how you would prioritise a nurse versus, firemen. It's really difficult, and I think that was probably felt across the floor as well.
I think that experience would show as well that members tend to have an interest in particular aspects, but I guess that's just natural, isn't it? Really, an understanding of a particular part of the budget or something that they feel very personally about. But it's very difficult to get that broader view. Like I said, we have tried. We do presentations. I think we've done some stuff quite recently where we presented a financial position, and surely as part of the budget process as well, we'll explain why we were doing things. But we are open to suggestions on how we can effectively do that. So as an outcome, I mean, part of the objective of the priority-based budgeting process is to enable us to get views on priorities, because I think we have in the past asked people for priorities, and we've had things back that said yes, we've prioritised it in 3 different ways. So nothing was a priority, and again the old adage about give politicians 10 things to ask them to prioritise, and they're all a priority. So it's a real challenge to say how do you get a view on what a priority is across all of these different areas. So but it's very difficult to do that when you don't have the granularity of the information that we need, which is what we're trying to collect through the priority-based budgeting process, where we can go to members. So perhaps something we can try, probably not next budget, but the budget after, is to go to members and say, look, these are these services. This is the way they're organised. This is what happens if you move them around. What do you think your priority is? And try and gather a more of a view to do that. It's an idea I've had for a long time. I wanted to do something. Pre-COVID, we actually appointed someone to help us priority-based budgeting in February 2020, and clearly that didn't go forward. And it was something that I'd picked up from work that I'd done previously many years ago with Cardiff City Council, where they had an issue about prioritising the redevelopment of the Docklands in Cardiff. And again, it was very difficult to get all the members to say, well, no, I want to prioritise this over other things. And they if I remember rightly, it was a long time ago, and I remember this, they got into a kind of almost a binary prioritisation process, which in the end gave a collective view and allowed them to get on and do what they wanted to do for the Docklands. So I think there's something, I don't quite know how that will work, and that's part of the project we're going at the moment. But that would allow I think quite a meaningful engagement with members. So that's something I think it's definitely on a list of things to do. So
you mentioned there obviously about the 2023 engagement, and very diplomatically said it didn't quite work out as expected. Where do you think it didn't work, and do you think there's anything you could refine, because it didn't basically happen in 2024? No. So rather than just abandoning the process and saying it didn't work, do you think there's anything that could be refined to make it work?
I think the work that is being done through the priority-based budgeting would work better in that process. So I think the information that we don't have that's currently being gathered to assist in that process will probably help inform Tynwald members around those, how you could prioritise in certain ways, depending on the level of service you provide in different areas. So I think that information at the time wasn't available. I think when this information is available, that would probably support that process a lot better.
Can I also just comment, Chair? Part of it was the timing as well, because we tried to run things in September, and various people weren't able to access the session. But in terms of the timing of members' priorities, and then try to line those up with departmental priorities and then governmental priorities, that there is that issue.
I see that. If you just forgive me a second, just wondering, we are an unusual body politically in Tynwald, in that you cannot just say, well, here's the Labour Party manifesto, and that is what we are then sort of tasked to deliver, and officers can then read into that. We are, certainly in the House of Keys, a coalition of 24, and council ministers is a subset of 9 of them, and it seems to be changing from year to year which 9 that is. So do you not recognise perhaps there is a real value within Treasury of understanding the wider political input, which might not just be the council ministers, but obviously today's backbenchers are tomorrow's council, so to sort of try and look forward as to where the issues are going to come from in the budget and where future budgets may head based on that intel that you'll get from that sort of prioritisation as well.
Yes, I agree. I think we do, but we need to find a meaningful way of doing it. I think that's my point. We haven't. I think that what we've tried in the past hasn't led to anything that we felt has added anything.
Would you mind perhaps sort of getting back to us with what that might look like? I appreciate that it's unlikely to be able to do a process probably before sort of budget 27. If not 28 because of the election, but in terms of giving some idea as to what you were hoping for and what happened, a bit of a retrospect and how you might change it, that would be really useful.
We're hoping, well, there's 3 stages to the project-based budgeting project. Well, stage 1 is just about to complete, which was the data gathering elements of it. Stage 2 is about trying to identify the service change implications. When we get to the end of stage 2, stage 3, which we haven't commissioned yet because I need to work how it's going to is around that element of it. So when we get to that stage, which I think will be the sort of June, July next year, we'll have a view on what we might want to do, and obviously the new Treasury Minister will be able to assist on that as well.
The priority-based budgeting is the future. We're thinking about that for the future. Would you have any notes about what happened in 2022 and 23 to share with us as well? Because I've got a recollection, but it might be inaccurate. I mean, I seem to remember that as Minister of Infrastructure, we decided we were going to go for something really tiny that would get people talking. And I seem to remember we put down as our only additional spend would be on maintaining the silt around the Liverpool ferry terminal. I seem to remember we just put down a guess. So if you have any notes about how that process worked, I think it might be helpful for members, and if you do, would you share them with us for us to look at them behind, in our committee?
We'll look at what we've got and send it.
So in terms of members' engagement, which is what we've just been focusing on, can I ask you, what have you done to actually seek members' views on how they feel about their engagement in the budget process, particularly those who aren't ministers? And whether they feel included, because of course the last 2 years has seen the highest 2 consecutive years of members of the House of Keys voting against a budget in budget history. 7 in 2024 and then 8 in 2025. Has Treasury sought members' views on if they feel there is inclusion, if they feel there's anything specifically that could be done to make them feel more part of the process and to feel their views are being heard?
I don't know, it's a political aspect to that. I don't know if the Minister wants to comment on.
In previous years, we've written to all Tynwald members before the summer recess, asking them for their ideas, their hopes, their priorities. Again, with relatively limited success. Those people who are interested in the budget process will respond. Those people who aren't often won't. And what we've also seen over the last couple of years is very much uncertain fiscal situation around the world, dealing with things like the FIRSA agreement earlier on this year, where there were some significant risks in terms of what that would work out as, and also dealing with some of the inflationary pressures as well. So it's meant the whole process has become a lot more difficult. Now, in terms of asking honourable members what they want out of the process, yes, we can always do better. Have I asked people why they voted against the budget? I have. And it's been one of the issues to deal with that is it's been for often very, very different reasons for each individual. There's been a particular part of the budget that one person hasn't been happy with, but another person has, but they've been unhappy with another part of the budget, and other people just unhappy with the budget process as a whole or government policy as a whole. So to try to understand and then mitigate that is a challenge.
I think I should say, I think I've said 7 for 2024. It was 6. It was 6 and 8. Yeah, we can take that. So members as well have also described defending proposals at Treasury board meetings as intimidating and subject to intense scrutiny. In your view, is this something that can be realistically improved, or is it inherent in the whole process?
I would be concerned if people thought it was intimidating, but subject to intense scrutiny. I think that's what you would expect. I think it's what the public would expect when people are coming and bidding for public money. It's not in my knowledge. Obviously, the ministers lead the political interaction element of it. Intend to be intimidating. The purpose of the departmental meetings is to understand the department's priorities and challenges, and where it feels that if there was some more money around, which hasn't been for a little while, where extra money would help, and also for the Treasury to try and understand, where there's opportunities for reprioritisation, and without the formalised process of what's within there. I mean, again, the members being involved in that is a key part of that, to allow them to put their views through as well. So they aren't intended to be intimidating. I guess there have been different personalities in Treasury over the last 10-15 years, and I guess that would have an impact on the experience and an individual style. But it certainly isn't it doesn't say in the Treasury handbook when the departmental members come in, give them a hard time. It doesn't. It says make sure we understand fully what these people are saying to us and how we can help.
I mean, if I can just add, in terms of understanding of the budget process, I suppose if you are in a department and you're taking part in the individual budget of that department, then you come to Treasury, and we do ask all the ministers to bring all the department members with them to give the presentation. That adds to that overall view. I mean, certainly while I've been Treasury Minister, we've tried to make it not intimidating or aggressive, but still have the required amount of scrutiny. I think Caldrick's right that certain personalities in the past have perhaps added to that perception.
And last one on me on this section, obviously coming out the back end of those sessions with departments is ultimately decisions. And one of the things that's been fed back is that many people feel how those decisions are arrived at can be a bit opaque. So do you think it could be more transparent as to how the decisions are made in the process and what comes out the other end and how that's been decided?
I guess we would convey the officer level when those decisions are made and they're ratified by the council ministers. We would convey that information in terms of this is the settlement that you've got. These are the bids that have been approved, and then we would put them into the pink book. And we've put an extra table in last year, table 12B, that shows all the movements between the budgets as well, which is something that we got from liaison with Guernsey as well, because. In going back to, said right at the very beginning, it is very difficult to give an empirical basis for some of the decisions that they make. They are inherently political, and they come down to the collective view of the council ministers as advised by the Treasury on what becomes a priority. And I guess that's the minister's role in terms of and the council minister's role in communicating those elements back. Is that fair, Minister?
Can I just pick up on a couple of issues that Mr Ashford's raised, and I'd just like to sort of hone down on a couple of details. I think there's a bit of inconsistency across government about the involvement in the budget process. Just from Treasury's perspective, is it Treasury's assumption that department submissions come from the departments, not just the ministers? And equally, and I think this is perhaps where there may be a greater inconsistency, that when you get proposed budget allocations coming back, that those are shared with the departments and not just the ministers.
That is our assumption.
Okay, that's good. The bids then that come from the department, ultimately, are those decided by council ministers, or are they decided by Treasury in terms of formulating the document that then goes to council ministers?
So we've got a standard template that the broad parameters that the departments use to put the business cases together.
Yeah.
The business cases are reviewed by the officers within Treasury. They're then taken to the Treasury board after the departmental meetings where they're discussed to make sure they're fully understood. Treasury will then make recommendations. They then go to council ministers. Council ministers makes the final call.
So all those bids are seen by council ministers, and they will make a decision
That's
based
right.
on.
So the exception to that would have been when again trying to change the process, we moved to financial plans. So there weren't bids. There weren't bids really. Last year we didn't have so many bids because of the financial position. So the financial plans would have been seen, but they weren't individual bids. Current year, absolutely, the bids are shown as successful and non-successful.
So all those bids then, or plans, they go to council ministers with a recommendation by Treasury.
That's correct.
And so how does then Treasury deconflict itself from its own bids? So if Treasury wanted a new IT system to deal with income tax or benefits or something, then that would obviously go into the mix. The same business plan would be put together as it would for any other department, and presumably so that Treasury then has sort of got to prioritise itself alongside everybody else.
The council ministers is that control.
Mr. Summers, did you want to?
Yes, please, if that's okay. I've got three.
So let's just go back over. So if you look in the financial regulations around some of the fund claims, etc., there are additional rules around Treasury's own expenditure and it going up and being approved by council. So there is some control.
I've got three. If I could either get pens out to remember the three, or I could do three by one. The first one is about this role of political members, because I think we'll all agree that the role of political members, departmental members, is pretty vague in statute. I think it just says there shall be them. So I've got two supplementary questions from that. The first one is people who've watched it for decades tell me that when Sir Miles Walker and others envisaged the departmental member system, they thought there would be all political spectrums in the departments, and there's a perception outside that that's not carried on, and it's particularly acute in Treasury in recent decades. So through time, the departments have ended up being politicised differently from other places, if you see what I mean. So that's perhaps something that I could ask you to agree whether you've had any reflections on that. In other words, in the 90s, there tended to be people from different parts of the House of Keys politically in each department, whereas now that's less so.
All I'm going to say is appointments to departments are a matter for the council minister.
Say again?
All I'm going to say is appointments to departments are a matter for the council minister and the chief minister.
It's just a perception.
I have no other comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, people are invited in to join a department. They can refuse. They can select not to be part of a department, and we've seen certainly in the last couple of years that becoming an issue, that people don't want to join departments. From my perspective, certainly when I took over as Treasury Minister, there was really quite diverse political point of view within Treasury. Mm-hmm. Spanning. If you want to talk left, right, socialist, more capitalist, there was that diversity of thought in there, and departments are better for it.
Okay, so that's very interesting, and we have a parallel committee looking at ministerial government, and that's something that we could take up together with them, perhaps. And then there's a Hansard answer, which is that there were 5 formal directions from council ministers to Treasury before the last general election, which is incredibly unusual. Have you had any directions to Treasury from council ministers since the election? Because that was something that was remarked as being unusual then.
I'd have to check.
I think that would be helpful. Mm-hmm.
I'd have to check. I can't say yes or no. I don't. No, I'd have to check. Okay,
and then the third one. It's very brief ones, which is my recollection is that Mr. Speaker asked a really good question in around July 2022, which which ultimately led to the management accounts being published, because you asked for all the information and got the answer, and then now we have much more information. And likewise with bids. I seem to remember, that started from outside Treasury, and now Treasury publishes the bids. So I think, do you agree with me that that's an example of Treasury being responsive to what people request and want?
I mean, if I can come in with that, because it was slightly political, the publishing the management accounts on an annual basis is fine, but actually doing it on a quarterly basis so people can see in real time, I think is an awful lot better. So that was political. With the bids, that was a freedom of information request, which it was agreed that no, actually the bids, obviously there may be some reduction for commercially sensitive information, but that they would be FOIable. And so once it had happened once, we then absolutely adopted the principle that not only the bids should be published, but also that the departments who submitted the bid should be aware that anything that they wrote down was going to be published, because that was a change for them as well in terms of some of the information that they were putting out, that it had to be publicly available.
Thank you.
So I just want to go back to possible reforms to the budget process. We've mentioned already about potential benchmarking against the other Crown dependencies. And I want to focus in on Jersey, because in Jersey, members can actually move budget amendments as long as they present the financial implications, including where any additional funding would come from, and they can receive advice from their Treasury officers on that. And their Treasury also publishes comments on those amendments. Do you think that a model like that could work here? And if not, what challenges do you foresee to preventing that being put in place when it seems to work down in Jersey?
Well, I mean, you could. I said you can do what you want. So, if Tim can determine he wants to do it,
But what I'm trying to draw out is, from a Treasury point of view, what would you see as being the potential challenge?
So I think this comes back to looking at the advantages and disadvantages of the kind of the executive-led system or the legislature-led system, and the advantages which you can look up, I'm sure, around the executive-led system is you get a kind of a consolidation around and a particular policy and an ability to drive forward policy, whereas where you get sort of more into the legislature's got more influence, you're looking at more of a kind of an ability to have a consensus base. And I guess you get issues like you would in the US, where you can't get agreement on elements of where they are at the moment. That said, one of the strengths I think of the financial planning then is we've got the medium-term financial strategy. So we've got that. If you were to allow members to come in with individual changes, we'd have to, as you said, take account what impact they had overall. The Treasury Act, obviously, I think it's Section 10, says that no financial motions are able to be made without the Treasury's concurrence. If those financial motions were made, I suspect that the process would be the member makes the motion, it comes to the Treasury says, yes, I concur with that one, or I don't, and then it rolls forward. So I don't see that.
Well, laws can be changed, of course.
If the law was changed, but the law at the moment it would be, I think it would still have to go back through. And again, this thing, the Council of Ministers, I think, would need to have a collective view that all of these different members, how they came together and what they did for the overall strategy for the budget, and that they were content with them. Because again, this is the presumption I have here: the budget is the budget of the government of the day. Yeah. The government of the day needs to be clear that it's there. I think what would be some of the challenges of that? Definitely, I think, Jersey, you said I think 3 people that just to deal with the administration around it all. So we'd have to put. We always say this: we need some more staff. But I think we would to be able to put that in there. I think one of the issues with anything in it where you're making decisions by committee, if you like, rather than a smaller group of people, is that you can find it more difficult to put difficult decisions through. Now you might think that's an advantage, or you might think it's an advantage depending on what you're going to do. So I think that's the kind of the thing I think you are going to increase the degree of scrutiny. I think you probably give members perhaps more of a public opportunity to show where they will want to do something. They do have the opportunity to make representations to Treasury Minister and Council Ministers at the moment, but you then have to amalgamate all of that stuff, put it back in together, and come out again with another budget that would. And so
my understanding of how the system works is that an amendment comes forward. If it is to increase expenditure in an area, it ultimately has to be cost neutral because it has to also display where the funding is coming from.
Okay.
So it actually still has to work within the envelope, and the Treasury has to certify that the calculations around the envelope.
But I guess the
correct.
calculation might be, well,
Rather than,
want to
but
put-
Treasury doesn't make a judgment on the decision.
No.
That is one for the legislature.
I mean, clearly, obviously, it works for Jersey, and I think you've taken some evidence of me from Jersey to understand what they think of it. You could do that, but I mean, to get to a situation where you've got a tax strategy, and someone comes forward with things to say, I want to increase a tax in a particular area to pay for another element of it. That would still have to go back through the Treasury, wouldn't it?
So it would need Treasury's view on it
Absolutely. But I think,
in terms
like,
of
so
the cost.
I think
balance.
the danger. I'm not saying one system is better than another. I think the danger with that is that you can end up with a broken view on without it's a lack of coherence in the budget really with a clear strategic view. I think that would be my concern, and you'd have to put mechanisms in there. So does that help?
And can I also add, it's been an interesting week this week in terms of Tynwald, because we've had two relatively large motions that came through, one on the minimum wage, one on the area plan, both which were subject to a lot of external lobbying of politicians. I think we need to be conscious that even on small island, that's increasingly an issue, and quite rightly, that people should be able to lobby their politicians, but those lobbies may be from people with particular interests who could therefore theoretically influence the national budget.
And doesn't it come down to that debate around whether the national budget and the primacy of it is effectively government or legislature?
Absolutely.
Just it's been subject to some debate amongst members, so I'd be interested to get the Treasury officer's perspective on it, about whether members can amend the budget. Now, I think what we've discussed is that actually from a practical perspective, any substantive change would need Treasury concurrence.
Any motion with a financial implication would need Treasury concurrence.
So,
Even if it was net neutral, it still need Treasury concurrence.
So would it? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you can agree or disagree with it. But is it that any amendment to the budget motion would actually be declaratory rather than binding in law?
I believe that's the case.
Okay. Thank you. Good. Mr. Thomas.
Oh, well, okay, and perhaps a written response might be better to this question, but obviously we need to unpick who decides whether to assist and whether to do something in terms of preparing something that needs Treasury concurrence. So, for instance, obviously the Minister is the department, but the Chief Financial Officer is responsible for providing advice to the department. And I have had answers from the Treasury over my however many years it is here, along the lines of the Treasury would help. The meaning of the Treasury Act Section 10 is that if you ask us as a backbencher to cost something, we will cost it. And I can't imagine a Treasury Minister going against that.
I think the answer is yes, of course we would.
Yeah,
absolutely, and we do.
And that wouldn't need the approval of the minister.
Yeah.
I mean, you go on and do it. And similarly, there may be some occasions where it would not be appropriate for the minister, perhaps to.
So I think that would be quite.
We do. I'd say we do have. I mean, it depends on the particular. Members do come and talk to us and ask us for advice.
Yeah. And
then they don't talk to the minister. They come and talk to the officers. Yes, we've got lots of examples of that where we help people work things up and help them think through things, or someone doesn't understand it. So yes, absolutely we do that, and that's not something not via the minister. If there's a political aspect to it, of course we would.
So I think that would be quite helpful to write it down for our findings, for our report, because obviously the Clerk of Tynwald is involved on a live basis, and he's got a view and worked out with Treasury about exactly how to draft and things. I think it would be quite helpful for members and beyond them, the public, to understand how that process works. You know, yesterday when Mr. Hooper put down his amendment in Social Security, I was engaged for quite some time with the clerk. To me, it would be quite good to go through some of the examples with primary legislation, private members' bills, with amendments to Social Security amendments. I think it'd be quite helpful.
No, I mean, I've flagged up the wording of that amendment with the Chief Financial Officer, because I think that was very, very well. I'm not quite sure whether that should be allowed.
I'm with you then, Mr. Minister. I was quite surprised with the way that the clerk drafted it.
There does need to be that clarity under the current rules that we have in terms of amendments coming forward, sometimes on the floor of the House, that have not been adequately costed or the impact has been assessed, but are basically financial.
But I think that the distinction that I tried to make in the past is about those motions that are binding and those that are declaratory.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key distinction, because I think if you were going to try and tie members' hands by just making an opinion on something, that would be, well, it would almost restrict the role of Parliament to zero, as opposed to actually this motion, if passed, would have an actual financial effect with no ability to mitigate it, then that's a very different scenario.
And the wording is key and the intent is key.
Yeah.
So I will write to the clerk of Tynwald in respect of that, and how we can make sure we can work together to make sure we're all happy.
Again, it all goes back to the idea of the Isle of Man is a hybrid executive legislature model with not very much written down in statute. My understanding of how it works in Jersey is ultimately the states of Jersey, the Parliament of Jersey, can bind government through its resolutions, but only for the subsequent financial year, not this financial year. Is that something that you've investigated at all?
That's a parliamentary matter, so no, we haven't.
Okay.
Carry on about timing and process.
Yeah. So moving on to timing and process. Now, we've heard some support for introducing more ways to engage members earlier in the budget cycle, such as an October financial statement, an estimates debate, or a departmental spending priorities debate. Do you have a view on what, from your end, would be most feasible?
I think we've tried some of these before, but I suppose it depends on, if we do earlier financial updates with estimates, they may be less reliable. So we can do that, and we're open to doing more, around that. We have, as I said, we have tried it, but we have struggled with some of the. We've done the October financial statement before the Minister will do his financial statement in Tynwald, and we have done estimate debates as part of the Tynwald member briefing process. But we're open to doing things if that is required.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because what would you do? The parameters, the way we've kind of run the budget is we set the parameters. Some of the big parameters around some of the large things, like how much we're going to increase the pay budget for, how much we're going to increase the non-pay budget for. They're quite broad, and they are linked in, and they have been for many years into the sort of overall financial strategy, which is to allow income to grow more quickly than expenditure. To put it very, very simply, that's what we're trying to do. So those things are kind of part of the medium-term financial strategy. And I guess, as I said in an opening statement, so a lot of the policies that sit behind the things that drive the budget, so the tax policy, there's transport strategies, all sorts of strategies. They do for the public right of ways is an interesting one that's been quite useful. So these things have been debated previously in Tynwald. So Tynwald's view is understood. The October statement is a good opportunity for people to see, particularly with the management accounts, to say this is how we're going halfway through the year. Have you got a view on it? Where do you think the problems are coming forward? And I do think those things are useful, and some debates around some of the major kind of national issues you've got, like things like the triple lock and various other things, which obviously took a lot of parliamentary time last year. So I think. Maybe it's a naive view, I don't know, but I think quite a lot of the things that are in the budget do get parliamentary time. If there was a way of pulling it together, I suppose more coherently, but outside of the budget, without having all of the budget together, I guess we'd be interested to hear what you thought on that.
And also, if I can just comment, during this administration, we had annual departmental plans coming forward. Which is something different, and again how that's evolved, so that they're all the way through the year, and they show the key priorities for those departments. That is another way of trying to have that debate in terms of what where the real key policies and strategies should be. But it's trying to link all that together with the budget I think it is difficult.
So, so just two things that have just come out of those answers. Firstly, in terms of, you said we've tried an estimates debate, and I'm wondering what you envision an estimates debate to be, because if you go back into Mag's history, back in the 80s, they were something very different what the estimates were, and I've recently seen a version of the estimates from another small Commonwealth jurisdiction that was a book that was that thick but it literally had the head count of every department, the title of each officer, not the name, the salary, and so you get down to quite a granular detail of where your money is going. I appreciate there's going to be an enormous amount of work that will have gone into that. So I'm just wondering what you mean by having tried an estimates debate, your contribution there.
So as part of the budget process and as part of the briefings to Tynwald members, we have
So you mean a debate and a workshop rather than a formal debate in Tynwald?
So it's not a formal debate, apologies. It's a workshop with, a presentation to Tynwald members to provide that overview of the current finances and estimates for the financial year. So we've done that as part of our presentation. So obviously we'd be open to change in terms of how you would see that debate, what that debate would look like.
It's just matter of, I think it's the granularity of the detail that goes into informing it, and it's shades of grey, I suppose, and that. And just to move on to the Minister's response about the department plans, and do you think that those have had any impact in terms of being informing the budget in any way?
Unfortunately not.
No,
I thought to begin with they would help to steer direction. I think what's happened for a whole lot of different reasons is they've been coming in now at different parts of the year, and so again it's purely about that department and what they're doing, and sometimes that can be slightly at odds with the island plan or revised island plans or revisions to the economy as a whole. So I think they are a useful tool, and used in the right way they could add to the overall process. I think there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done, partly just in terms of standardisation, in terms of timing, in terms of the amount of information that's there, and more financial information rather than more policy KPIs, which sometimes aren't particularly costed.
It's very difficult to get a balance. I think we do. Obviously, we do review every year what's in the Pink Book, how we could change it, how we can make it better, how we can give more information. And if you look at the history of the Pink Books, I'm sure Mr. Ashford knows this off by heart. You can see that they start. They've gone back many years ago when they weren't called the Pink Book. I thought they were called the Green Book or something, weren't they?
That's the estimates. That's separate from the Pink Book. The budget is the Pink Book. The estimates were the Green Book.
So they were just numbers. They moved into the Pink Book. The Pink Book had a little bit more in terms of numbers. Then it really developed, and there was a lot more information put in around department plans, around lots of KPIs, etc. They sort of dropped off again. Then in the last 10 years, we put in again sections in the Pink Book for departments to describe what they were going to do. The idea of that was for department to say this is what's going to happen in my budget. This is what I'm going to do with it, to give more information to the public. But also we put in the list of fees and charges in the budget to provide more information. And then there's too much information, so we start to hone it back down again. So there doesn't seem to ever be a sweet point, a sweet spot really, if you know what I mean. So we would, if Parliament asks the Treasury to put some more information in a particular area in the Pink Book, I think obviously we'd look at it, and it would be a decision of the Council of Ministers. But we're not trying to hold back any information. It's trying to get a balance between what's a useful amount of information to allow a debate on things, but also coming back to this thing about can some of the decisions or the implications of the decisions made around the budgets be opaque. That the departmental sort of descriptions about where an opportunity for the departments to say this is what it means for us, and obviously that's now been superseded by the department plan. So it's very difficult to get away, because some people want you might like to look for 1,000 pages of numbers. Some people only want to look at 2 pages of narrative, and trying to get that balance right is very, very difficult.
And just on that though, isn't the real problem not so much that some people find it too much or too little, but actually if you want any more than what's provided, you're the gatekeepers to it. There is no other way of getting that information other than to ask busy officers at a busy time. But there is, rather than there is no, for example, gateway into Exacta for members to go and have an appropriate level of access to be able to go and find out what's going on in a particular subdivision of government. Is that perhaps part of the problem that we then end up taking up a lot of human resource in the gatekeeping role of that financial information?
I think there's an expectation about what you would get from that as well. I think you could give access to the systems, and some people not. I don't think many people would be able to get that. I mean, obviously we've had questions, etc., where we've of late from members where we've produced the whole of the ledger and the transactions within it. I think there's data and information, isn't there?
Yeah.
When we have data, we can probably give data the information to access to data, but we can probably do stuff. I don't know. We haven't looked at this in full entirety yet, but I'm sure there's some stuff we can do with AI as we move forward. Obviously, we're replacing the accounting system at the moment, and that will give us more capability and more ability to do that in the future. So something that's definitely we would want to do, and I do think that's the way to do it, isn't it? Is to have all the information available, and then allow people to go in and cut it and see it how they would like to see it. That's quite a lot of work, and it's a little way off, but I understand what you're saying. That would be the ideal thing to do.
It's understanding what's missing as well, so what's currently missing that actually isn't published, and getting that fed back to us is quite challenging as well. But if members want to provide us with that, then we can look at where the gaps are and look at how we could provide that information in a different way that's helpful.
So we have provided a lot of information. So a good example is the bids, publishing the bids, but maybe politically it's different, but we have nothing. We have no comments back. Nothing, not one.
Getting down to a divisional level, in any part of government, and you could think of anything from prisons to public transport, until you know where your money's going, where you're spending it, and how many staff are taking and what the capital resources to deliver the objectives of the department. Down at that level, it's hard to know where to save money, isn't it?
You do need some narrative around it. So
of course, you need to understand the business, don't you?
Yeah, of course we had... do you remember we had an online tool that we ran for a number of years, and to allow people to go in and interrogate? Right, nobody used it.
So think of one, possibly looking to my left and right, 3 users.
It might have been 3 users. There weren't many more because we can see how many people are accessing the system. The only time the system got any hits is when we were updating it. So we withdrew it and nobody noticed. You can put the information there, but like I say, I think it's a challenge really to know what people are interested in, and also kind of quite often things are motivated by the issue of the day.
So, my questions have all been very short to now, but this is going to be more of a sort of statement from me and inviting responses from you, if I get away with it through the chair. And I think it was that financial reporting tool goes all the way back to Mr. Tier, and I think it's been withdrawn. But let's start. The Jersey debate, as far as I can understand it, goes on for 3 or 4 days. Ours doesn't. Ours finishes in the afternoon after it's been launched in the morning. So that's quite a profound difference. Also in Jersey, members have higher standards imposed on them, in as much as they have to produce reports about what they're going to move. And there's a sort of feeling that you have to bring financial stuff in line with the budget, because it affects the budget. To stop at that point, is that something we should be considering? Should we be putting extra pressure on backbenchers who want to declare something that they've actually got to produce a report, and they've actually got to do it in line with what they would reduce in a priority-based budget? What do you think?
The parliamentary matters, all I would say is quantity doesn't always reflect quality.
No, that's true, but the Jersey reports tend to be 2 or 3 pages, and they do show that this has been the costs have been estimated and the funding source has been identified, and surely that would be helpful to put that pressure on members if they're going to move that something should be a priority, that they actually have to show what it would cost and work with Treasury members to establish that. I mean, yesterday, your minister, you said something like, we can't really do this because we don't know how much it will cost, which is a very reasonable thing to have said. Do you agree, Minister?
I mean, yes, I think particularly when you're talking about finance debates, which basically the budget is really, I think that there is the I'd like to see an obligation on people who want to challenge it to have done some of their homework, to know the implications of changes either way. Put tax up, put tax down. It's very easy to say, oh, we'd like to halve this or double that.
Yeah.
But if you haven't taken the effort to go out and find the actual impact and the cost of it, particularly and looked at how that could be either recovered or fed into other areas, then that becomes far more of a populist statement rather than a proper motion.
Okay.
And again, just to reiterate, Treasury officers have the ability to cost various things. We've tried to provide more information to members in terms of particularly national insurance changes, tax changes, the various shifts in things like thresholds and what the impact is. And also obviously what the impact might be in terms of drawdown on reserves from various increased expenditure, and we will continue to do that to either individual questions or more broadly.
Yeah. So just before we move into this question about the interval between the budget and the debate and the other aspects of the timeline, just building on that, you said there was an annual departmental plan. Well, this administration, and I'm just using infrastructure as an example because I know it, I think I'm right on this, there have only been 2 annual departmental plans in 4 years, and financial plans are now not Treasury policy. You've moved over to financial working in different ways, and you mentioned that the Pink Book used to have and now doesn't have more information linking to priorities in the departments. Perhaps we should see all these things together, and we should look to actually go back to look to more what it was like when Mr. Speaker was describing in the 80s when these documents were presented by Treasury and government in one way. Do you think, is there any work being done about that you could share with us?
I mean, if I could say that certainly when I came into Treasury, one of the frustrations from Treasury officers was that they were waiting for submissions from the various departments in terms of the narrative, and that was delaying sometimes the publication of the Pink Book because they were trying to deal with that very, very quickly on top of all the other aspects of it. And so from a Treasury perspective, we wanted to try to make it as simple a process as possible to get it out to members, and then also get it obviously agreed by the council ministers as quickly as possible to give that lead time. And I've been trying to drive officers to try to bring forward the finalisation of the Pink Book earlier and earlier, so that certainly the council ministers and then members have got more time to digest it. Incorporating other bits from departments, more narrative from departments, is absolutely fine. It fills out the Pink Book, doubles the size. We can do that. Part of it is what members want. Do they want that narrative, or do they want the data and how that data then turns into information to inform? And I think from my point of view, we're constantly looking at the best way of presenting what is a very complicated and interchangeable set of figures.
And if I'm wrong,
I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
No, nothing to add.
So now, if I'm wrong, there have been more than 2 infrastructure departmental reports. I apologise in advance, but I can only recall 2.
I mean, one of your, if you don't mind, Mr. one of your comments in the past has been the absence of the fees and charges from the Pink Book, and again, I think from an officer perspective, they were published in the past, but everyone knew that they were inaccurate because they were dependent on orders coming through, and sometimes that wasn't the case.
Yeah, so the kind of idea behind that was that the public could understand what the department's intentions were in relation to fees and charges. And like I said, it didn't run, so we've dropped it out. But we have a new approach this year anyway with the fees order. So.
The paper I did for council ministers in 2014-2015 really, because it was a third of government's revenue that there was just no visibility or coherent policy over. So.
And just to beat up Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ashford, Douglas City Council, which is quite a large organisation, each of the committees does actually have to agree as part of the budget cycle what they're going to charge for everything, and then it's all presented as one document. So, but the explanation I've always had is government's much more complicated than a city council and the like. Okay, to move on, one suggestion we've heard is to have an 8-week interval between budget publication and debate, and in Jersey the budget must be lodged 12 weeks before the debate to allow sufficient time to scrutinise the budget. How would this affect the budget process at your end?
I think I answered that when Mr. Ashford asked that question earlier on. I won't want to repeat it.
What's the operational advantage advantages and disadvantages of the current budget process timeline in Treasury? Is that answered already?
I think so. I said it works. It's understood. It gets an answer at the other end, and it served the island well, really, because it's the island's financial position is strong. The weaknesses are obviously members feel like there needs to be more involvement. I guess and I don't know. It's interesting to know where that locus of decision making went made. That's why I think it is a political matter. Really.
It does seem that the present cycle is sort of crowbarred between sort of Christmas being an obstacle to delivery on one hand and the start of the financial year in February. If you were starting with a blank sheet of paper, would you do it differently? Would you have a 31st December year end, or even placate the constant criticisms from the Department of Education at 1st of September start of year?
Because another complication as well is around policy around VAT.
Income tax, and the timings of.
But VAT isn't determined by us. So if the Chancellor decides that they want to make in the UK wants to make an announcement on 22nd November rather than on 22nd of October,
but the way that's easier than having to have people do a part-year income tax return and then have to do another one for administratively with the Ireland government. That changes tomorrow, then that changes tomorrow, and there's nothing much needs internally. But fair enough. I guess.
But to build on that, to build on that, there is a difference between Jersey and Guernsey and the Isle of Man, in as much as the Isle of Man is more integrated into UK national insurance and VAT. So I think that should be on the record. Am I right?
And benefits as well.
Yeah.
And so certain benefits in terms of uprating and again, having a budget statement at the end of November is a bit of a challenge for us, because really our budget should be done by then. Now, yes, we can bring in some parameters, but it still creates a little bit of uncertainty in terms of the accuracy of it.
You are right to point out the national insurance connection as well. That, obviously, to keep reciprocity with the UK on certain benefits, we need to replicate those elements of it, and the timing of when those things come through, triple lock is a good example.
I mean, just to point out, though, of course, in the historic scheme of things, the current process is fairly modern, because actually you even as late as the early 90s had budgets coming forward in the March. In the 60s, 70s, they didn't come through until the May, June, even on some occasions. The financial statements were May and some in June in the 60s as well. So it's although in the scheme of things, doing it as we do it now, when it comes to a February sitting at Timward, is actually quite a modern day process.
Yeah, and I don't want to overplay it, but there's the swan and the legs going under the water, and sometimes, particularly over the last 15 years or so, when there's been need to move very, very quickly on things, the legs are working very, very quickly and under the scene. And whilst it's you're sliding into a February debate, it looks easy and everything's set out. There have been very, very late changes to the budget before my time. I'm hearing about Mr. speeches being changed in Timward, for example. So being able to, but I do think that's an advantage of our system, that you're able to react very quickly, because some things that happen are outside of our control.
Yeah, and I think if you don't mind, Mr. there is an increasing demand from the public and politicians for more information, more accurate information, and more certainty as well in terms of what's going on. So having relatively well-defined timelines is, I think, very important.
Indeed, and that brings me very neatly onto, I think, one of the things that Chief Financial Officer said in his opening remarks is that there's no source of best practice for here. And so my obvious question is, have you heard of the Public Expenditure Financial Accountability Programme, which is a multinational programme that does actually set out best practice and has done assessments on a number of sovereign nations over the years to assess their performance against best practice indicators?
I didn't say there wasn't best practice. I did. There wasn't one fully formed model that for everything. I mean, I think we do. I say we do research. We're always looking at what we're doing and see if we can improve it. Yeah. To clarify, I didn't say there isn't any other best practice, and we're the best practice. There absolutely there are, but I don't think there's one model that all the jurisdictions think this is the one we're going to use. We're going to use the Russian one or whatever.
No. So where do you look to for best practice then? I mean, are you aware of that particular model?
I don't know if we are.
I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
No, so it'd be useful if you send us a link through it, we'll have a look at that.
Because it doesn't say how it should be done, but it does give indicators of best practice about there should be a good document that goes out to departments setting out clear parameters and guidance in order for them to be able to put their
So we do look at things that OECD also have research on this.
They're one of the funders of this particular
project. So they absolutely may well have seen those elements of it. Obviously the UK government put out that the National Audit Office put out information on budget. There's definitely something came out last year around budgetary control, although their system is slightly different for us because of complexity. And clearly, obviously, we're interested to see the views of the Tynwald Auditor General.
And on that, I remember the mover of this motion that set up our committee. She chose to, I moved it on her behalf, but Ms Christian chose to put in the CPA models, didn't she? So is that something that you've ever considered in the department as the relevance? Because that is actually attached to the motion that set us up.
I know they have been considered in the department.
I think we've had representations in the past with various different suggestions and models from the acting
In other words, Mr Shimon's personally rejected the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association benchmark was, I think, my recollection of that one. Do you look back at the how accurate your budget process has been? Because it's obviously really important to make sure that the assumptions that go into the budget are as near as possible, notwithstanding shocks, as to how accurate your forecasting and has been over the years and where you need to refine process as a result.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is it isn't necessarily a forecast, it's a plan. I had this discussion with Mr Robert Shaw on many occasions previously. I'm sure he would remember. So it's a plan. Do we think that's always what's going to happen? No, we don't. I guess a good example of that would have been if you look back over the last few years and you looked at our expenditure plan. It's actually what was in the plan was lower than what's happened because we've had overspends in various areas. And at the moment our income's a bit higher. But we do part of every year we will go back and look at what we had projected as a plan to see where and see where the differences are. I guess so for a good example is pay. So for the last few years we restricted pay for 1 or 2% in the budget. That isn't a forecast. That was just an assumption. But we do go back and say, well, what was the impact on the departments because the pay award was averaged out at 3.5 or 4%, and we only gave 2%. So clearly there's a built-in efficiency and savings. It's probably something we don't sing about enough, really, about the amount of money that's been saved. So if we'd gone through for the last 10 years, say, for example, using an increment based on actual pay awards or on inflation, the budget would be much bigger than it is now. So in terms of squeezing, which is why I think the departments are struggling now, because we've been squeezing for 10 years or so. I guess the other things where we would say the accuracy of our forecasting hasn't been so good as we'd like it to have been capital expenditure, but there are other issues around that about our ability to drive them forward. And you look at the structural deficit in our projections on the reserve levels. Some of that has been because of spending level and income levels, and some of the income tax is a little bit more unpredictable. But we haven't spent as much on capital as we are, and I think we've got some plans to see if we can look at that. We do have the head of economic advisory in the Treasury now has monthly forecasting meetings with income tax in particular, and some of the other areas as well, to try and look at our forecasting accuracy and see where they're running. So we do look back, but I said it isn't a forecast, it's a plan. Interestingly, talking about learning from other areas, I remember when the chief, I think he was the treasurer from St Helena, came over a few years ago. I was talking to him about the way that they present, and they produce their budget with a kind of funnel at the end to show sort of the various different scenarios that could come out. maybe that's something that we could develop a bit more to say, but there's such a wide variety, I guess, of outcomes. It's difficult to do that.
Interesting that the bit in the middle is about how you feel that the budget process has had an impact in curbing public sector pay. You think that's
not expenditure pay? No, the department's budgets.
The pay expenditure.
the pay expenditure?
The
Yes.
pay expenditure. So if the budget was £100.
Yeah.
We've allowed £102 in the budget, but the pay award has come in, and if you kept it a full establishment, it would have been £104. But because the departments have only had 102, they've effectively had to find £2. So we have published information on this in the past. But when you look at it in terms of what's really happening is that the expenditure levels have been set at a real term reduction level for many years.
Well, it's interesting because the data I was sharing with the Treasury Minister yesterday was that it would appear that public sector pay has outstripped private sector pay for the last 4 or 5 years on the Isle of Man, and that obviously then has impacts elsewhere on the budget. But to come back to the point originally was about, okay, if expenditure has sort of exceeded the plan for quite a number of years concurrently now. I'm just wondering how you've adapted the plan and the planning process in order to improve that.
It's very challenging, isn't it?
Yeah. But that's why you get paid more than me. So
That's one of the reasons.
we are continually reviewing the way that we do that.
how do you go about that then?
We've introduced additional measures like scrutiny panel reviews to try and understand and understand more about what's going on in the departments and what those challenges they're facing are, and understanding how they're exercising their governance and control around their budget. So that has been brought in, and I think that's helped us understand a lot more about what's happening to help assist in the reviewing of their bids and our advice, and also how we then produce the budget going forward. So I think,
so for clarity, that's an offer. Sarah chairs those scrutiny panels. They happen on a monthly basis, or if depending on whether what the department's position is, they might be less than monthly, but generally monthly. When she goes through and scrutinises and tries to understand that. But it is a challenge. What would you? I mean, I guess. If for health and care expenditure, what do you do? Do you set what you think the forecast might be to spend, or do you set what plan you think that the organisation should aim to achieve in order to arrive at the financial position that you want it to be there? And there's lots and lots of things in between that are a challenge. So
we've had lots of happy and fun hours in the Public Accounts Committee in a similar sort of dynamic, and I think we'd probably all agree that it's the success is really generated when you get your financial information, your non-financial information, and your performance indicators all lined up. That's when you really know when you're achieving, and that's possibly one of the areas that Max Care is a good example of where those aren't quite lining up the way that we would hope that they were.
It's just building on these scrutiny panels. It must be an incredibly difficult job being a FAS business finance partner in departments, in terms of for whom am I working? Am I working for the local accountable officer, the chief officer of the department, or am I working for the overall national interest? Treasury Council ministers. It must be incredible. I mean, you made the case brilliantly for the extra resilience that it creates, the professionalism of it. I'm not suggesting in no sense it's not working, but it must be such a hard job to manage locally. In the old civil service. Sorry, the Foreign Service. It was all you had to manage constantly the local British people going native, and I wondered how you actually managed that when you were
Sarah explained. The first thing I want to say is that the finance business partners do a fantastic job. They have done a magnificent job. There have been some real resourcing problems that have arisen this year for various reasons, which has left us short of resources, and the executive director for Financial Advisory Service and everything have done a brilliant job in plugging the holes that have been left by things that happened outside of your control. And I think in our previous model, and I understand that I do completely understand that if you're an accounting officer in a department, you've got your own finance director, how that is comforting for you, and they're not doing anything else. But the moment that finance director isn't there for some reason or another, what have you got? And the whole idea was to be able to allow this rotation, allow this understanding, a broader understanding of finances in a particular department to exist within the finance business partners. So they have been able to do that. You can't. It's not something you can see, but I'm really proud of the work that they've done there. But yeah, yes, it is very, very difficult not to know where you are. I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they're Treasury officers. They are Treasury officers, but I think what we've seen over the past few years is actually the department chief officers really they have embraced having that financial advisory service support, and they really value it. And I think particularly with the scrutiny panels there, the finance business partner will be there to support and advise the chief officer of the department if they need to call in on that assistance. But they are seeing value on it, as Caldrick mentioned. The ability to have a service and have that rotation allows a fresh pair of eyes from Treasury to look at different ways to advise the chief officer in different ways based on the experience they've gained previously. So I think that's providing a lot of benefit as well. But it is a balance, I think you're correct there. It's just I think the department's really seeing that value, and that's been the feedback that we've had in Treasury from departments, is that they do value that.
Yeah, and is there a risk, with all of us collectively having described how prioritisation is so difficult, is there a risk that they end up having a really difficult moment? And so I'll ask a very specific question. Can the local finance partner give advice to the chief officer without reporting it back to head office?
Absolutely, that's their job.
Okay, so they are allowed to do that.
Absolutely. There is a partition between. We've tried to work together because we're such a small organisation that it'd be silly, wouldn't it, to have one lot of financial people working one side and one not working another side, and for there never to be any cross fertilisation or discussions. But no, their role is to advise the department, as their finance director would have done previously. Yeah. That's that, and you can say, well, are they partisan to one area or another? I mean, I think that the philosophy that they have is that they want to do the best for the island, and they give that impartial advice on that premise.
So, how does it work in really practical terms? Does each of your finance partners get told you've got only an extra 200,000 in revenue, you sort out how you divide it up, and you've only got 5 million extra in new capital, you divide it up? Or do they get told, make a pitch collectively about how much you want for both of those?
The accounting officer, that's very clear in the financial regulations. Okay. The chief officers are the accounting officers, and they're responsible. The other functions of budget holders and responsible financial officers are also set out in the financial regulations, so it's very clear what people's roles are. Okay.
So would we be able to put together primary legislation, a new Treasury Act, based on what's in the financial regulations?
I have no idea, Mr. Thomas. I don't know. It's not something.
Financial regulations are essentially secondary legislation, aren't they? So you could move things between primary and secondary.
So the financial regulations are financial directions made by the Treasury.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is, if it's working and it's described accurately in the financial regulations what's working, why wouldn't you match the primary legislation given it's 50 years old now? Or 80 years old in some cases.
I don't know why you would want to put a financial management process or structure into primary legislation.
No, I didn't mean that. I meant if in terms of working out whether it's Council of Ministers' priorities or whether it's Treasury's priorities or what the role of the budget is, because it is different in the 50s legislation from the 80s legislation, but the 50s legislation hasn't been repealed. And then control, what does it mean, control?
I don't think I'm able to comment because I don't really understand.
Certainly haven't found it restrictive in terms of doing this, and as I think we said earlier, you could run any model in the world under the legislation we have almost. I mean, it's very,
that's my understanding. Yeah,
you find it so perhaps overly broad rather than overly restrictive. Perhaps,
and again, the ability to refine, improve, and review financial regulations, we could do that relatively quickly.
Yeah, I don't even want to tie them up in primary. They do need to move. Having the flexibility.
I think I'm still waiting for a track changes version, but I'm sure I can leave that with you. Thank you very much. From my experience, and I have a lot of experience in this, time with Treasury officers and in the committee room is time well spent, and certainly come away learning an awful lot more. So thank you very much for your time this morning. It's been much appreciated, and the committee will now sit in private. Thank you.